Hi BookTube, Aaron here. I hope you're doing okay. Today I'm going to be carrying on with my book tour for 2024, or my library tour. And I started off with what was on my Kindle, and I'm going to be carrying on with some actual physical books today. I think it could be said that I have quite a few more physical books than I do ebooks at the moment. And I'm going to carry on in an area that I haven't really shown that much, at least in library tours. Although looking at this shelf that I'm about to show you, you probably have seen most of these books at some point. So I'm going to be doing some non-fiction, and today I'm going to be going through this shelf here, just below the Penguin Classics. And this has history books, it has travel writing, and it has sort of literary criticism and theory and stuff like that, books about books. And really, this is, at least last year, I think this was one of the fastest growing areas of my library. It is quite a small area. I don't read nearly as much sort of history and stuff like that as I would like, and I'm trying to improve on that. And I noticed that last year. I also noticed that I really enjoy travel writing. And so at the moment, I've got as much as I can fit in here. I've got 2 shelves of non-fiction, but maybe eventually it'll grow a bit more. So starting off with the history books then, the first one is Heretics and Heroes by Thomas Cahill. This is how Renaissance artists and Reformation priests created our world. This is sort of on my pile of possibilities for the year, so you'll be hopefully seeing me actually read this later on this year. We'll see how that goes. This is one I read last year. This is Rubicon by Tom Holland. Just a great narrative history, a great overview of the Roman Republic and the fall of the Roman Republic. And it was really fascinating. I think great as a introduction to that period, particularly for someone like me who's interested and might know a lot but hasn't really read that much about the period. And I think he is one of those writers that does sort of immerse you in the world that he's writing about. So I really enjoyed that, and I think this is part of a trilogy of histories that he's written so far about ancient Rome. And then I suppose quite similar, really. This is Byzantium: The Surprising Life of a Medieval Empire by Judith Herron, and this is just a great overview of the Byzantine Empire, so of the Eastern Roman Empire after Rome fell. And I'm really just fascinated by the Byzantines, and so this was just a great introduction to them, and I recommend it if you're interested. But I definitely need to get a few more slightly more in-depth histories, I think, on the Byzantine period. Then we've got Marion Mead's biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine. I haven't read this, and neither have I read this. This is Lady Fanshaw's Receipt Book: An Englishwoman's Life During the Civil War by Lucy Moore. Recently, Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads and Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, they made a tag called the Civil War tag, which is all about really the American Civil War. But they said that if you're from another country, you can sort of talk about your own country's civil wars if you had any. And this is probably the only book on my shelves that actually is about the English Civil War. So otherwise I haven't really read anything about it. Next up, we've got The Edge of the World by Michael Pye, about the North Sea, about, I suppose, the history of people who have depended on it from antiquity up until more or less the present day, I think. And it just gives you a different perspective on history. So I found it really interesting. I've sort of found out a lot about sort of people groups that I'd never really heard of, like the Hansa and things like that. But as well, yeah, just a slightly different perspective on things you might also know as well. I didn't particularly enjoy his writing style. It felt a little too much like an overdub for a history documentary rather than a history book. But on the whole, I still enjoyed it. Then we've got Citizens, A Chronicle of the French Revolution by Simon Schama, which, again, like the Byzantium book and like Rubicon, was just my kind of initial foray into sort of exploring the French Revolution. And so I'd quite like to read a little more about it and then come back to this. So I can't really give, much of an educated opinion of this, but I still enjoyed it. And the same goes for the next book, really. This is The House of Revolution, the House of Government, about the Russian Revolution by Yuri Slezkine. And again, I read this quite recently and really enjoyed it. It took quite a while though, because there's just so much information coming my way. And then if I can enter some of these books or exhume them. Next we've got From the Holy Mountain by William Dalrymple, which is another one that I'm hoping to get to this year. This is on my sort of pile of possibilities, my little list on the fridge. And this isn't on that list, but I would still like to get to it, so it's kind of on my B list, even though I'm not putting any pressure on myself to read the A list this year. So, it might be a decade before I get to it. This is The Border by Erica Fatland, and it's sort of travel writing. So this book and the one before are sort of merging more into travel writing territory. And the very long subtitle is A Journey Around Russia through North Korea, China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Norway, and the Northeast Passage. So yeah, I think that's more or less all you need to know. That's all I needed to know. So it's travel writing, but it's finding out, I suppose, how people live in this sort of, I suppose, this kind of liminary space. Yeah, it sounds fascinating, and I think it's very much about the communities just on the other side and how they relate then to Russia on the other side. So yeah, I suppose quite ominous, I suppose, with how things have gone with one of their neighbours recently. Then we've got A Time of Gifts by Patrick Leigh Fermor, probably one of my favourite things that I've read for a very, very long time. Yeah, this was one of my highlights of reading last year, and it was the thing that made me realise how much I enjoyed travel writing. So I read this, and then I read the two books that follow on from that on the same journey, from The Hook of Holland to Constantinople. There's Between the Woods and the Water, and there's The Broken Road. And really, it's a great journey, even when he's on it. There are people he meets who are just like, that's a really weird thing to do, just to walk all the way across Europe. But also just the way he writes, you're getting all of this youthful energy and this sort of naivety. But also he's older and looking back at it as well, so there's a kind of somber note to it. So yeah, I really loved those books. I've also got another book by him. This is A Time to Keep Silence, which I think is all about monasteries, and it's quite a bit shorter than the others, so it'll just probably go in a backpack when I'm off on holiday somewhere, I think. Then we've got The Frayed Atlantic Edge by David Gange, which again is sort of travel writing, a different kind of journey. It's from it's kayaking from the Shetland Isles down the west coast of Scotland, and then down the west coast of Ireland, down the west coast of Wales, and then sort of around Cornwall as well. And it's very much about Britain and Ireland's relationship to the Atlantic, about the communities that sort of live in these windswept places, and how people have been inspired by them, and the sort of history of people who've lived there in the past, and what it's like to live there now. And it's just a brilliant book, and it's got these photographs that he took when he was on the journey as well. And I'm really not sure how the camera didn't fall into the bottom of the sea, but it was, just a great book. Next up, this one is a bit of an odd one. It's one that I've kept from university, and it's The Journal of a West India Proprietor by Matthew Gregory Lewis. Matthew Lewis wrote The Monk, a great horror gothic novel, and West India Proprietor is his guised way of saying slave owner. So he inherited a plantation when his father died, I think, or maybe an uncle or someone, but anyway, he came into the ownership of a plantation, and these are just his journals from his journey out there to have a look at it. And so it's, I suppose, important in a way, since it is a first-hand account of slavery and what a plantation in the Caribbean looked like. But it's obviously also it's from the perspective of the owner, so it's probably going to be it's going to smooth over certain things, might be condescending in some other ways, and maybe the people running the plantation as well maybe wouldn't want to show him quite everything that went on there. Then next up, we've got The People of the Sea by David Thompson. Again, similar to The Frayed Atlantic Edge, I seem to often bring them both up at the same time. It's about a lot of the same areas, about the west coast of Scotland and the west coast of Ireland, and it's about these stories that are told there about the seal folk, the Shelkie, people who, seals who turn into people, but it's as much about the people who tell the stories. And it was written in the 60s or the 70s, I think, and in that period, it was just not really feasible, not really sustainable for a lot of people to stay in some of these places on some of these islands, and people were moving to the mainland and to cities, and so a way of life was kind of dying out, and so there's quite a melancholic note to the book as well. And he was sort of capturing all of this life before it was gone. Then we've got an introduction to literature, criticism and theory. So we're clearly in the books about books kind of section. This is by Andrew Bennett and Nicholas Royal. And it's just a sort of handbook for literature students, really, that I've kept hold of. And I only ever read the relative chapters when they came up, but I'd be intrigued to see what it would actually be like now from the other side, I suppose. In a sort of similar waters, we've got these a very short introduction to English literature by Jonathan Bates, and we've got a very short introduction to modernism as well, which I'd be very intrigued to again, like the Bennett and Royal, just go through from the perspective of being a graduate. Next, we've got How to Write a Thesis by Umberto Eco, which in some ways is outdated and in other ways isn't. For me, it's just fascinating to see what it was like to have to use index cards when you were looking up a book in the library. And then we've got some essays by Umberto Eco called Inventing the Enemy. I suppose this should really be on the next shelf down, but I wanted to keep the Umberto Eco together as much as I could. And then we've got How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. which really doesn't do what it says on the tin. But I really love the book anyway. It isn't what it says it is. I think it's really about the joys of rereading, about finding the books that mean a lot to you, that you think are worth giving time to, and about rereading them, and about really spending a lot of time with them. And he goes through the books that are like that for him, and it makes you want to read those books, but it also makes you want to work out what those books are for you as well. So a great book is just not the book it says it is. So I suppose it is quite a sort of very grabby kind of title, I suppose. Then we've got, everything's just falling over. We've got an anthology of writings by the American Transcendentalists. I don't really know all that much about them, and I'm quite intimidated about by them. So I'm hoping to at some point make my way through that and get a better idea about them. Got a few poetry books, or books about writing poetry. We've got The Ode Less Travelled by Stephen Fry. This is, I suppose, getting you to enjoy being an amateur poet, and to get you just enjoying writing poetry for yourself. So it's a great introduction in that kind of way. And I often find a lot of these kinds of books are a great way to just get you appreciating poetry, get you understanding what's actually going on in a poem. So although they're designed to get you writing poetry, just for fun, they also help you in your reading of poetry as well, I think. My favourite of those kinds of books is Rhyme's Reason by John Hollander. And this is one, it just kind of just keeps going. It is in sections, but you can just read it and just keep going through. So it's, and he has a very entertaining voice on the page. And then we've got Poetry in the Making by Ted Hughes, which is, again, a similar kind of thing, much more split up. And this was originally designed for children, really, but it's still a lot of fun as an adult reading it. Then we've got a history of reading by Alberto Manuel, which is very much the kind of book about books that I'd like to get more of. I talked a fair bit about this last year as well, but really love that book. Got Why Write by George Orwell, a little tract, an essay about meaning what you say, or maybe saying what you mean. And then finally, if I can twist my arm around, we've got A Reader's Guide to T.S. Eliot by George Williamson, which I always find useful when I'm just dipping into a certain T.S. Eliot poem. I think it more or less goes through every single poem. He often just has one particular reading of a poem, but it gives you an entry into it, and then you feel a little less intimidated about it, and can have a look around and see what else is there. But yeah, I always find this very, very valuable when reading T.S. Eliot. And there we go. So that's the first shelf done. So we'll go down. We've got some literary biographies and sort of general stuff as well. And then we'll see where we go on from there. So I hope that was interesting. Let me know what you thought, and any recommendations as well for travel writing, for books about books, for history on Byzantium, on the Russian Revolution, on the French Revolution, anything like that. Feel free to let me know. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.